I never imagined the day my dream job would become my worst nightmare. But that's exactly what happened when I walked into Grayson Realty 5 years ago. Back then, I was full of hope, fresh out of college, brimming with energy, and eager to learn. The company was small, but that didn't matter to me. If anything, I liked the idea of being part of something intimate, a place where hard work would be noticed. And Grayson, the owner, knew exactly how to reel people like me in. "You're part of the family now," he told me on my first day, his white teeth gleaming in a smile that, at the time, felt genuine. "Stick with me, and I'll make sure you succeed." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He seemed confident, charismatic, and successful, the kind of mentor any young professional would kill to have. For a while, everything felt perfect. I picked up tasks quickly, worked late to prove my worth, and soaked up everything I could about the real estate business. It didn't take long for Grayson to start trusting me with bigger responsibilities. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where the cracks in his charming persona showed. The way he snapped at our receptionist for minor mistakes. The way he talked about clients behind their backs, calling them idiots or pushovers. The way he always seemed to take credit for deals that other employees closed. I told myself it didn't matter. That's just how business worked, right? I was wrong. The first time I really saw Grayson's true colors was during my second year at the company. I had worked tirelessly on closing a mid-level deal, a modest house that wasn't flashy but meant the world to the young couple buying it. When the sale went through, I was thrilled. Not only because the buyers were so happy, but because the commission would give me enough to pay off one of my credit cards. It wasn't a huge amount, just $1,200, but at the time, it felt like a win. When I didn't see the commission on my next paycheck, I went to Grayson's office to ask about it. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Oh, that? Yeah, we rolled that into the general fund. Helps keep the lights on," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "But, it was my deal," I stammered, confused. "I thought we were supposed to get 10% commissions on our sales." Grayson finally looked at me, his expression hardening. "Look, if you want to nickel and dime every little deal, maybe this isn't the right place for you. We're a team here, and sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Got it?" I nodded, swallowing my frustration. What else could I do? I wasn't in a position to argue, and I certainly couldn't afford to lose my job. Still, the incident left a bad taste in my mouth. It wasn't just about the money, it was the principle. I had worked hard for that sale, and Grayson had taken it without a second thought. Over time, I started noticing a pattern. Grayson always found ways to shortchange his employees. Promised bonuses that never materialized. Pay raises that were delayed for months, then conveniently forgotten. Overtime hours that were accidentally left off paychecks. He had an excuse for everything, of course, a glitch in the payroll system, a sudden downturn in the market, unexpected expenses. But the excuses never added up, and the resentment in the office grew. I wanted to leave, but the thought of starting over somewhere else was daunting. Besides, despite Grayson's shady behavior, I had learned a lot at the company. I'd built relationships with clients and honed my skills. I told myself I could tough it out, at least until I had enough experience to land a better job. Then came the deal that changed everything. It was a $3.2 million property, a sprawling, modern estate with floor-to-ceiling windows and a backyard that looked like something out of a movie. From the moment the listing came in, I knew it was going to be a challenge. The market was tough, and high-end buyers were notoriously picky. But I was determined. I spent weeks researching, staging, and marketing the property. I hosted countless open houses, stayed late at the office to follow up with potential buyers, and even gave up my weekends to meet with contractors and inspectors. By the time I found a buyer and closed the deal, I was running on fumes. But it was worth it. The sale was a triumph, not just for me, but for the company. The commission alone was $60,000, and I was finally going to get my share, $6,000. That money was going to change everything. I'd finally be able to pay off my student loans, put a little into savings, and maybe even take a short vacation for the first time in years. On payday, I practically ran to the break room where we picked up our checks. I tore mine open, my heart pounding with anticipation. But when I saw the number at the bottom, I froze. $2,000. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe payroll had mixed up the amounts. I marched straight to Grayson's office, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and confusion. "Hey," I said, holding up the check. This is wrong. I was supposed to get $6,000 for the Jennings deal." Grayson looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Oh, right. About that." He gestured for me to close the door, then leaned back in his chair like we were about to have a casual chat. "I know you've been working hard," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "And I want you to know I appreciate it. But we have a policy here, any commission over $5,000 goes into the bonus pool for the team. It's all about fairness, you know." I stared at him, my mind racing. "What? That's not in my contract. You can't just—" "It's company policy," he interrupted, his voice firm. "If you didn't read the fine print, that's on you. Look, I'm not here to argue. If you're unhappy, you're welcome to leave. But good luck finding another job in this market." He smiled then, that same smirk that had once seemed so charming but now felt like a slap in the face. I left his office feeling humiliated, betrayed, and powerless. He knew I couldn't afford to quit. He knew he could get away with it. And worst of all, he didn't even care. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the check that was supposed to change my life. The anger simmered in my chest, growing hotter with each passing minute. For years, I had let Grayson take advantage of me. I had let him steal from me, lie to me, and use me. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't going to let it slide. If Grayson wanted to play dirty, I was ready to play dirtier. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Grayson's smug face, his voice replaying in my head, "If you're unhappy, you're welcome to leave." He knew he had me trapped. I needed the paycheck, and he knew the market was too saturated for me to find another job easily. He thought I'd just roll over, like I always had. But this time, something inside me snapped. I woke up the next morning with a determination I hadn't felt before. If Grayson wanted to take from me, I was going to take from him. The question was, how? I knew I couldn't just march into his office and demand justice. That would only get me fired, or worse. No, I had to be smart. I had to be patient. I had to hit him where it hurt most. The first step was gathering information. Over the next few weeks, I became a ghost in the office, quiet, observant, invisible. I stayed late, coming up with excuses to linger after everyone else had gone home. I volunteered to help with extra tasks, ones that gave me access to files and records Grayson probably thought no one cared about. I even started accidentally overhearing his phone calls, picking up snippets of conversations that didn't sit right. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The first clue came in the form of a spreadsheet. One night, while cleaning up the conference room after a late meeting, I noticed Grayson had left his laptop open. He was in his office, talking loudly on the phone, so I knew I had a few minutes. My heart pounded as I leaned over and scanned the screen. It was a list of transactions, payments from clients, commissions, and something labeled vendor fees. At first, it looked normal. But then I noticed a pattern. Some of the vendor fees were absurdly high, $10,000 here, $15,000 there. And the names of the vendors? They didn't match anything I'd seen in the office. Curious, I jotted down a few of the names and amounts before closing the laptop and heading back to my desk. That night, I did some digging. The vendors weren't real. They were shell companies, fake entities that existed on paper but didn't actually provide any services. And the bank account numbers linked to them? They all pointed back to one person, Grayson. I stared at my screen in disbelief. This wasn't just about skimming commissions or underpaying employees. Grayson was running a full-blown scam. He was stealing from clients, inflating invoices, and funneling money into his own secret accounts. The man who preached about teamwork and fairness was a thief, plain and simple. Once I knew what to look for, the rest came quickly. I started keeping copies of everything: emails, contracts, bank statements, even internal memos that showed discrepancies between what clients were billed and what they were supposed to owe. I dug through old files, piecing together a timeline of his scams. It turned out Grayson had been doing this for years, long before I joined the company. He was careful, but not careful enough. One day, I overheard him on the phone with a client, sweet-talking them into paying an extra $20,000 for unexpected permit fees. The client hesitated, but Grayson was relentless. "Trust me," he said, his voice dripping with charm. "This is standard for a property like yours. I'm just looking out for your best interests." As soon as the call ended, he leaned back in his chair and laughed to himself. He didn't know I was standing just outside his office, out of sight, listening. That laugh lit a fire under me. I wasn't just going to stop him, I was going to destroy him. The next step was figuring out how to use the information I'd gathered. Turning it over to the authorities seemed like the obvious choice, but I hesitated. Grayson was slippery, and I knew he'd find a way to spin the situation if I didn't have airtight evidence. I needed more. I needed witnesses. I decided to start with my coworkers. Carefully, cautiously, I began testing the waters, dropping hints in casual conversations. "Hey," I said one afternoon to Megan, one of the junior agents. "Have you ever noticed how some of the client fees don't match up with the contracts?" She frowned, lowering her coffee cup. "What do you mean?" "Just, little things," I said, keeping my tone light. "Like, I was reviewing the Henderson file, and they were billed for a staging company we've never worked with. Doesn't that seem weird?" Her eyes narrowed. "Yeah, that does seem off. I've noticed some weird stuff too, but I just assumed it was above my pay grade." I nodded, letting the conversation drift to other topics. Over the next few weeks, I had similar talks with other employees. At first, most of them were hesitant to say anything negative about Grayson. But as I shared small pieces of what I'd found, just enough to make them suspicious, they started opening up. "I've been shorted on my commissions more times than I can count," one agent admitted. "I thought it was just me," said another. "But yeah, those vendor fees don't add up." Slowly but surely, I was building an army. Then came the day everything changed. I was sorting through some old client files when I found something that made my blood run cold: an email exchange between Grayson and one of our biggest investors. In the emails, Grayson had promised them inflated returns on their investments, returns that were impossible to achieve unless he was cooking the books. This wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. And it was the smoking gun I needed. I made copies of the emails and added them to my growing collection of evidence. By this point, I had enough to take Grayson down. But I didn't just want to report him and walk away. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done. I wanted him to lose everything, the way he'd taken from so many others. That's when I came up with the plan. It was risky, but if it worked, it would not only expose Grayson but also hit him where it hurt most: his reputation. The first step was leaking the information. I created an anonymous email account and sent the evidence to a local journalist known for uncovering corporate corruption. I didn't just hand over everything at once, I trickled it out, giving them just enough to pique their interest and keep them digging. Next, I shared the evidence with my coworkers. By now, I had their full support. Together, we started spreading the word to clients and investors, warning them about Grayson's scams. Some of them didn't believe us at first, but once we showed them the proof, the tide began to turn. Clients pulled their accounts. Investors demanded answers. And Grayson? He had no idea what was coming. The final step was the lawsuit. I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I reached out to a labor attorney and shared my story. When my co-workers heard about the case, many of them joined me, turning it into a class action lawsuit. Grayson's house of cards was about to come crashing down. But the best part? He still didn't know I was behind it. Grayson had built his empire on deception, and for years, he had gotten away with it. But as I watched the cracks in his carefully constructed world begin to widen, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The fallout was starting, and it was beautiful to behold. The first sign of trouble came when the local news ran a story about financial misconduct at a prominent real estate firm. The journalist I'd contacted had done their homework. They didn't name Grayson directly in the first piece, just hinted at widespread fraud within a mid-sized real estate company. But the evidence they presented was damning: falsified invoices, fake vendors, and embezzled client funds. The moment the article dropped, the office became a war zone. I arrived that morning to find Grayson pacing the floor, his phone pressed to his ear. His face was flushed, his usual confidence replaced by barely contained panic. He barked orders at the receptionist, snapped at his assistant, and spent most of the day holed up in his office. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was whispering about the article, trying to figure out who had leaked the information. I played dumb, of course, pretending to be just as shocked as everyone else. "Do you think it's true?" Megan whispered to me as we hovered by the coffee machine. "I don't know," I said, keeping my voice low. "But if it is, we might be in serious trouble. What if the company goes under?" Megan's eyes widened, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She wasn't the only one. By lunchtime, several of my coworkers were frantically updating their resumes and sending out job applications. No one wanted to be tied to a sinking ship. Grayson must have sensed the shift in morale because, by the end of the day, he called an emergency meeting. We all gathered in the conference room, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Grayson stood at the front, trying to project an air of authority, but his usual charisma was nowhere to be found. "I'm sure you've all seen the article," he began, his voice tight. "Let me be clear, these accusations are baseless. Someone is trying to sabotage us, and I won't stand for it." He paused, scanning the room as if daring anyone to challenge him. No one did, but the silence wasn't one of agreement, it was one of suspicion. "This company has always operated with integrity," Grayson continued, his tone growing sharper. "If I find out who's behind this smear campaign, they'll regret it. Now, I need all of you to focus on your work and not get distracted by rumors. Understood?" There were a few murmurs of agreement, but no one looked convinced. As we filed out of the room, I caught a glimpse of Grayson's face. Beneath the bravado, he looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling faster than even I had anticipated. The journalist I'd contacted wasn't done, they followed up the first article with a second, this time naming Grayson directly. The piece outlined his schemes in excruciating detail, backed up by the evidence I'd provided. It was a full-blown exposé, complete with interviews from disgruntled clients and former employees. The fallout was immediate. Clients started pulling their accounts, demanding refunds for the fraudulent fees Grayson had charged them. Investors, spooked by the bad press, began withdrawing their support. Even the office landlord got in on the action, threatening to evict the company if Grayson didn't pay the overdue rent. Grayson was scrambling to do damage control, but it was too late. His reputation was in tatters, and the people who once admired him were now avoiding him like the plague. While Grayson's world fell apart, I was working on the next phase of my plan, the lawsuit. The labor attorney I'd contacted had been thrilled to take on the case. "This is textbook wage theft," she told me during our first meeting. "If we can prove he's been systematically underpaying employees, he's looking at serious legal consequences." I wasn't the only one with grievances. Once word of the lawsuit spread through the office, more employees came forward, eager to join. Megan was one of the first to sign on, followed by several others who had been victims of Grayson's shady policies. "It's about time someone did something," one coworker said during a meeting with the attorney. "He's been screwing us over for years." The class action suit wasn't just about unpaid wages, it was about sending a message. Grayson had built his career on exploiting people, and now those people were banding together to take him down. As the lawsuit gained traction, I kept my distance from Grayson. I didn't want to risk him suspecting I was behind everything. But I didn't have to do much to keep up appearances, he was too busy dealing with the fallout to pay attention to me. One day, I passed by his office and saw him slumped at his desk, his head in his hands. Papers were scattered everywhere, his phone ringing incessantly. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. He looked like a man who had lost everything. But then I remembered all the times he had taken advantage of me and my coworkers. All the lies, the manipulation, the stolen money. Whatever he was feeling now, he had brought it on himself. The breaking point came a few weeks later. I was sitting at my desk, pretending to work, when I heard shouting coming from the lobby. I got up to investigate and saw a group of clients confronting Grayson. They were furious, waving invoices and demanding their money back. "You're a fraud," one man shouted, his face red with anger. "You think you can just steal from us and get away with it?" Grayson tried to placate them, but it was no use. The clients weren't interested in his excuses, and the scene quickly devolved into chaos. Security had to be called to escort them out, but the damage was done. By the end of the day, half the office had cleared out. Desks were empty, phones unanswered. Even Megan had packed up her things, leaving a note on my desk, "Good luck. You're braver than I am." I stayed late that night, savoring the silence. The once bustling office was now eerily quiet, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound. I walked through the empty halls, taking it all in. This was what justice looked like. But I wasn't done yet. The lawsuit was still in progress, and I knew Grayson was going to fight it tooth and nail. He might have lost his clients, his investors, and his employees, but he still had money, and money could buy good lawyers. If I wanted to make sure he didn't wriggle his way out of this, I had to be ready for the next battle. As I left the office that night, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of Grayson. He had spent so long holding all the cards, but now, the deck was stacked against him. And I was the one dealing the hand. The storm hit harder than anyone expected. The lawsuit, the media exposés, the mass client exodus, it all brought Grayson Realty to its knees. Within a month, the company was effectively finished. Grayson filed for bankruptcy, sold off his luxury cars, and put his $1 million home on the market. For the rest of the world, this seemed like the end of the story, a greedy man brought down by his own lies. But for me, it wasn't over yet. I thought I had seen the worst of him, thought I knew the depths of his corruption. I was wrong. What I uncovered next made everything else look like child's play. The bombshell came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was at the attorney's office, reviewing the latest developments in the class action lawsuit. Megan had joined me, along with 2 other former employees. We were going through the mountains of evidence we'd collected when the attorney leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "There's something you all need to see," she said, sliding a file across the table. It came in through Discovery. "It's troubling." I opened the file, expecting more financial records or emails. Instead, what I saw made my stomach drop. It was a series of payments, large ones, funneled from the same fake vendor accounts I had uncovered. But these payments weren't going to Grayson. They were going to someone else. A name I recognized instantly, John Radner. John Radner was one of our biggest clients, a high-profile real estate investor who owned dozens of properties across the city. He and Grayson had always been close, too close, now that I thought about it. Grayson had bent over backward to cater to him, even letting him bend the rules on contracts. But this? This was something else entirely. What is this? I asked, my voice shaking. These payments were disguised as vendor fees, the attorney explained. But they're actually kickbacks. Grayson was funneling money to Radner to secure exclusive deals. It's illegal, of course, but there's more. She flipped to the next page, revealing a document that sent a chill down my spine. It was a property deed, a massive commercial building downtown. According to the records, Grayson had sold the property to Radner for a fraction of its value. Wait, Megan interjected. Isn't that the Thornton building? The one we sold last year? Yes, the attorney said. But the sale price on the books doesn't match the market value. Grayson took a massive loss on paper, but these kickbacks more than made up for it. What's the catch? I asked, knowing there had to be more. The attorney hesitated, then turned the page. The catch is this: Radner flipped the building 3 months later for double the price. And guess who bought it? I leaned forward, scanning the page. My blood turned to ice. The city. The Thornton building had been purchased by the city government as part of a redevelopment plan. Grayson and Radner hadn't just scammed private clients, they had defrauded the taxpayers. By now, I was used to Grayson's greed, his willingness to step on anyone to get ahead. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just about money, this was a criminal conspiracy. And the more we dug, the worse it got. Radner wasn't the only one involved. There were records of other buyers, other investors, all tied to Grayson through shady deals and fake accounts. And it wasn't just buildings, they had been flipping land parcels, forging zoning permits, even bribing local officials to push through approvals. This goes way beyond wage theft, the attorney said grimly. If we take this to the authorities, Grayson and Radner are looking at prison time. Megan looked at me, her eyes wide. Do we do it? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to pull the trigger, to finally destroy Grayson for good. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the whole story. Something about the payments didn't add up. I need more time, I said finally. I need to figure out why he was doing this. I spent the next week going through everything, emails, contracts, even old voicemails I'd saved from my time at the company. And then, late one night, I found it, an email chain between Grayson and Radner, buried deep in a folder labeled Archives. In it, Radner was pushing Grayson to sell the Thornton building at a loss. Grayson resisted at first, but Radner insisted, dropping a cryptic line that made my heart stop. Do you want me to tell her the truth about where the startup money came from? Because I will. The startup money. My stomach twisted as I realized what this meant. Grayson hadn't built his company from nothing, like he always claimed. Someone else had financed it. And whoever they were, they had leverage over him. I kept digging, desperate to connect the dots. Finally, I found it, a scanned copy of a promissory note, dated 10 years earlier. The lender? Radner Capital Investments. The amount? $500,000. Grayson's entire empire had been built on borrowed money. And when he couldn't pay it back, Radner had forced him into a Faustian bargain, fraud in exchange for silence. The final piece fell into place the next day, when the attorney called me with an update. We just received another batch of documents, she said. You're not going to believe this. She was right. Among the documents was a payment record from one of Grayson's fake vendors. The recipient? Linda Grayson. Who's Linda? Megan asked, peering over my shoulder. My guess? I said, my voice hollow. His ex-wife. It all made sense now. The startup money, the fake vendors, the kickbacks, they weren't just about greed. Grayson had been using the fake accounts to funnel money to Linda, likely as part of a secret divorce settlement. If the truth came out, it wouldn't just destroy his company, it would expose him as a fraud and a failure. Radner had known this and used it to control him. I had everything I needed to destroy Grayson once and for all. But as I sat there, staring at the mountain of evidence, I felt an unexpected pang of doubt. Grayson deserved to go down, no question about it. But Radner? He was the puppet master, the one who had orchestrated everything. If I only exposed Grayson, Radner would walk away clean, ready to ruin someone else's life. I made my decision that night. Instead of sending the evidence to the authorities, I sent it to every major news outlet in the city. Not just the stuff about Grayson, the entire story. The kickbacks, the bribes, the fraud. Radner's name was all over it, along with a dozen other high-profile investors. By the next morning, the story had gone viral. The headlines were brutal: real estate kingpin caught in scandal, and city officials tied to massive fraud scheme. Grayson and Radner were both named, along with the entire web of corruption they had built. The fallout was immediate. Grayson was arrested within days, charged with everything from embezzlement to tax fraud. But he wasn't the only one. Radner was taken down too, along with several city officials who had taken bribes to approve shady deals. In the end, justice was served, but it came at a price. The lawsuit dragged on for months, and while we won, the settlement money was a fraction of what we were owed. Grayson declared personal bankruptcy, his assets seized to pay restitution. As for me, I left the real estate business entirely. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Grayson. I think about how close he came to getting away with everything. And I think about the look on his face when they hauled him out of his office in handcuffs. That, I'll admit, was worth every second.